In breaking news today that I don't think any of us saw coming, at least on the surface, NASCAR might be going to Brazil for the Clash. So this was via Motorsports.com, who put out an article that today and yesterday, NASCAR has had meetings with the governor of São Paulo, who is currently, I will add, in a governor election race, and also the representatives and marketing officers from NASCAR. And they have shown interest in wanting NASCAR to come to São Paulo for the Clash. And the city said the interest would be for the 2026 event, making the race at Bowman Gray coming up a one-off year, sort of a stopgap like many had, I think, initially thought it would be. And it would be the first NASCAR Cup race, both in Brazil and South America at that. And I think what we need to learn here is that this is the direction NASCAR is going in. NASCAR has had a big push in the last couple years towards international racing. We're seeing the push right now to try and get into Mexico, for instance, in the early part of the year. We've seen the push that they've tried to get back into Canada, as they had pushed into Canada, and there's a base up there. This is just another step in that line of production, basically. And there's a lot of things I think that can be looked at with this, as we don't know too much necessarily about the event, but there are questions that are very valid, both positive and negative, about such a race. So, first off, NASCAR putting a large amount of emphasis on this also coincides with NASCAR putting a large amount of emphasis into the NASCAR Brazil series, a series that Daniel Suarez actually this week is racing in. Now, I will also note that if you're somebody who's maybe not an international fan, Brazil does have a pretty big motorsports audience. And this is a big reason why they're pushing to be there. And I've even noticed with my own analytics that Brazil is one of the top countries outside of America that has viewers for my channel. Hi to all those Brazil viewers, by the way. But I think the big questions from this that will be raised are costs. Costs will be big for the teams, for everybody in the industry, you name it. If Portland, for instance, and granted it's the Xfinity Series, but if Portland, for instance, is not cost effective in any way, the teams all lose money and there's no real way for them to gain money, how on earth would going to the other side of the earth make it marketable enough for the teams to go there, especially seeing how the charter negotiations seemingly have been locked up for the last couple months as well. I just don't see how the teams could afford that unless the negotiations are going way better than we thought, or NASCAR is in some way going to subsidize the teams, because there's one thing to go from basically the East Coast to the tippy top of the West Coast. It's another thing to go from halfway up the United States of America to over halfway down South America as a continent. And I think that also you would have to question the date on this. I would probably assume that this would be before the Super Bowl again, 2 weeks before the Daytona 500. But just like there's a bit more of a crunch when it comes to the 2 weeks between the Clash in Los Angeles and the Daytona 500 itself, there would definitely be a time crunch, there would be a resource crunch, there would just be a big crunch going that far. While other different series and different sporting leagues around the world are used to going around the world, this is still new for NASCAR. And I think it would be a pretty big gamble if you don't have everything, every single duck in a row, to try and do this right before the Daytona 500, your biggest race that sets the tone for everything during the season. You need Daytona to go right, because if it doesn't, money-wise, it's going to be a bad year no matter what. And then you have to ask, well, what other dates could they do? Maybe they do a race in January, give the teams a little more of a stopgap. You still have that break, especially when the NFL goes to 18 games, where, yes, the NFL has the king's ransom with viewership, but you're able to crack through a little bit during that part of the year and then give enough time for teams, drivers, and everybody in the industry alike to have a little bit of a downtime to prepare for the 500 again. That could be something they do. I mean, hell, during the 1950s, 60s, around that time, there was a race every year in January. There were some races for the new season starting in December. So it's not necessarily out of the norm if NASCAR were to do this, or they do it maybe during an off week, if it's a 2-week Olympic break or something like that. The Clash, no matter what, belongs to Fox, so Fox can pretty much do whatever it wants with it. I would assume before the season would be the best option still. I know traditionally it's been that way, but this is not a traditional event anymore. And that's, I think, something we'll look at in a moment, but it's just got to be known by the fans. This event is not the Clash of old, and it never will be again. And the other question I have for this is, can this become a points race? It's highly rumored that Mexico will be having a points race. Canada at any point will probably have one as well. Why would Brazil not get one when it has a pretty big base and NASCAR has sunk a ton of money into it? This to me seems like a trial run, and if it works out well, you bring the entire field down and you have a points race, which would be one of, 2, 3, maybe 4 down the line international races that NASCAR could do and try and eat into that kind of market gap that Formula One has over them. Now, again, I talked about it for a little bit, but the Clash, it's never going back to Daytona. I don't care what fans, especially old school ones, say. Unfortunately for you, it just is out of the bag at this point. The cat is gone. Daytona with the Clash had a great run, but the last couple of years proved that the teams just rode around, had a test session, and wrecked them up at the end. And there's just too much money, A, being wasted and crashing up a bunch of cars in Daytona, but B, there's just too much money on the line international-wise if NASCAR gains traction for them not to do so. Because for all the money they gain from American TV and attendance rights and everything like that, if they were to replicate that in different countries around the world, NASCAR would have inevitable gains in revenue. And that's something they can't leave off the table in an ever-growing and changing international world. Sports in general are going this way. The NFL, for instance, is having a second game of the year in Brazil. The Friday after the opening kickoff, Thursday night being opening kickoff, Friday right after, the Green Bay Packers and the Philadelphia Eagles are playing each other. Two teams who I would say are playoff caliber, if not bound, are playing in Brazil International because they know it's that big of a deal to expand. That's why I don't see NASCAR going backwards in this. NASCAR is not the same NASCAR it was 5 years ago, let alone 20, when the Daytona Clash was a huge deal. So with that, I want to know what you think on this, because there's a lot to think about. What are your thoughts? Do you think the Clash should be an international race? Should we stay at local short tracks or something like that? Or at old school tracks, the way that Bowman Gray would be or North Wilkesboro is for the All-Star race? What do you think the Clash should be? Let me know down in the comments below. And while you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more great and fun NASCAR content. Thank you so much to all my channel members for your continued support. And until next time, have a good one.